My name is Captain Louise Ellis, 27 years old, United States Air Force. At a gala in full dress uniform, my father raised a glass and mocked my body before the entire room. Laughter echoed. Then Landon whispered, "Odora." They didn't know. That word would unlock the ghost in the F-22. What would you do if your family erased you in public? Drop your thoughts below and hit subscribe. I am Captain Louise Ellis, United States Air Force. At 27, I wore my dress blues as if they were armor. But that night, in the ballroom at Peterson Air Force Base, the uniform felt more like camouflage. Thin fabric trying to conceal a truth that everyone already knew. The dining out had been planned down to the last napkin fold. The scent of roasted beef and garlic butter floated through the air. Polished brass insignias gleamed in the chandelier light. Silverware clinked in synchronized rhythm, like a drill team trained for months. 100 conversations blended into one practiced murmur until the microphone at the podium popped once, and silence spread like a command. This was my father's night. Colonel Charles Ellis was stepping into retirement, and the Air Force honored its own with ceremony. He was the center of the orbit. Handshakes, laughter, polished anecdotes. His second wife, Evelyn, stood at his side like a queen at court. Their son, Landon, hovered close, tall and confident, a younger reflection of his ambition. Together, they looked like a family carved into granite. I stood at a table near the service doors, where waitstaff passed behind me with trays balanced high. My place card bore my name in neat block letters, but it had been placed deliberately at the fringe. The agenda for the evening lay folded in front of me. The colonel's farewell speech circled in red grease pencil. Every detail had been choreographed, except me. I traced the rim of my water glass as my eyes scanned the room. Clusters of officers and contractors leaned in toward the head table, their smiles angled upward like flowers tracking the sun. Laughter rose from that circle, warm and abundant, but it stopped at the invisible moat of space surrounding me. I was the island no one crossed to reach. From the podium, my father adjusted the microphone. The sharp tap sent a piercing echo across the room. I flinched despite myself. He had always commanded with sound. Booming orders on parade fields, clipped corrections in living rooms. Tonight, his voice carried the same authority, wrapped in polished charm. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for joining me. This is not just a farewell, it is a celebration of legacy." Legacy. The word landed like a weight. I had braced for it. He went on, recounting sanitized war stories, battles reduced to digestible lessons, victories polished to shine. People chuckled, applauded at the right pauses. He gestured once to Evelyn, his hand resting on her shoulder with possessive ease. He gestured again to Landon, who stood a little taller in his fitted suit. I felt Evelyn's eyes sweep the room. When they found me, the look wasn't anger or even dislike. It was colder than either. It was the look one gives an old photograph of a first wife that should have been tucked away, a relic still haunting the house. I straightened my collar, feeling the stiff fabric against my throat. My starched blues had always been my shield. But that night, under the weight of chandeliers and the heat of silent scrutiny, they were paper armor. Someone at my table whispered, "That your dad?" I kept my gaze forward. He's the commander tonight. I heard the chuckle, low and knowing, but I didn't respond. Silence had become my habit, my discipline. I had learned to breathe slowly, to log details instead of reacting. On stage, my father's speech gathered momentum. "Discipline," he declared, "is the Ellis family's greatest inheritance. Discipline is our legacy." His eyes swept the room until they landed on me. For a second, they locked, cold and deliberate. My heart drummed once, hard, then steadied. I knew what was coming. The ballroom felt like it was choosing sides without a word spoken. Polished shoes gleamed under white tablecloths, medals winked in the light, and every smile seemed angled toward the family at the center. I was left at the edge, holding a glass of water, the ice cubes rattling softly. the only applause in my corner of the room. It was a court, and I was the ghost invited only to prove I had been forgotten. And yet, in the shadows of that ballroom, I began to feel the weight shift. They thought they were burying me under ceremony, but even ghosts know how to leave signals. Pressure had been the language of my family long before I ever wore a uniform. My stepmother never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her cruelty came in measured doses, like a steady IV drip. Quiet corrections about my plate at dinner. Reminders about discipline that were never about health, always about control. My father enforced her silence with his own. He never contradicted her, never defended me. His silence was his consent, and his consent was its own verdict. Landon grew up fluent in that language. What began as whispered names in childhood hallways, Odora, the scent that didn't belong, evolved into a crown of confidence in adulthood. He wore it like a uniform he hadn't earned. The dining out was only the latest performance of that inheritance. But pressure doesn't vanish. It transforms. And when I left for the Air Force Academy, I carried it with me like extra weight in a rucksack. I thought there, at least, discipline would be judged by standards, not by bloodlines. I was wrong. From my first week, the name Ellis preceded me. Some instructors leaned too kindly, offering praise before I'd earned it. Others pushed harder, determined to break the shadow of my father's reputation. Among cadets, the verdict was unanimous. I wasn't just Louise Ellis. I was Princess Ellis. The nickname scratched itself onto dusty windows in the barracks, whispered in the chow line, murmured after room inspections. It didn't matter that I outran most of them on the track or scored higher on avionics exams. Every achievement was tainted by suspicion. Every failure magnified as proof of entitlement. And then there was Riggs, barrel-chested, crew-cut, and convinced humiliation was the only road to strength. He latched onto me like a personal mission. My inspections were harsher than anyone else's. He'd pull a single thread loose from a perfectly made bed and fail the whole room. He handed me a toothbrush and ordered me to clean the squadron's common room floor on my knees while others watched, smirking as they passed. "Princess needs practice," he'd say, his voice loud enough to echo down the hall. I stayed silent. My discipline was to absorb, record, endure. Silence is not surrender. It is preparation. One night during winter survival training, Riggs altered my navigation map. A tiny pencil shift of a single coordinate. Hours later, my team and I stumbled half-frozen through knee-deep snow, our rations gone, our morale in pieces. When we finally made it back, shivering and exhausted, Riggs stood at the checkpoint with his stopwatch in hand. He didn't offer blankets. He didn't offer water. He smirked and said, "Thought a colonel's daughter would be tougher than that." That night, I lay awake in my bunk, my breath fogging the air. The loneliness was sharp, bone deep. I had escaped one prison only to find another built from different walls. But prisons, even military ones, are places where you learn to study the guards. I started logging. Every insult, every altered coordinate, every inspection note, every stopwatch time. Not out of paranoia, but out of practice. Proof became my weapon of choice. Where others lived off rumor and hierarchy, I learned to survive on receipts. The cracks began to show in ways my tormentors didn't see. In the simulator, my hands moved with a steadiness they couldn't shake. I stayed late, running through emergency protocols until I could land blindfolded. The instructors noticed, even the ones who didn't like my last name. A few lines from a retired colonel turned professor lodged in my head and stayed there. "You don't fight turbulence, cadet. You dance it through." It was the first time anyone had reframed discipline not as domination, but as clarity. That sentence would later save my life. Back in the squadron, the pressure continued. Princess, tourist, ghost. But names lose power when you learn to hold your breath and wait for the moment the room runs out of oxygen. Because pressure doesn't just crush. It forges. And while they thought they were breaking me down, I was becoming something else entirely. Something they wouldn't recognize until it was too late. The ballroom hushed when my father gripped the podium, His posture was immaculate, shoulders squared beneath the gleam of metals polished to mirror shine. He commanded silence with nothing more than a pause, a trick I had seen since childhood. A pause was never empty with him. It was a fuse, and we all knew it. He began with the performance he had perfected over decades, gratitude to the generals, warm anecdotes of deployments reshaped into polished parables, each story smoothed until no rough edges remained. People chuckled, raised their glasses at the right places, and the air grew thick with admiration. Then he pivoted. I felt it before he said a word. The greatest honor, he declared, is not medals, not even command. The greatest honor is building a legacy that outlasts you. His hand settled on Evelyn's shoulder, a picture of loyalty. His gaze shifted to Landon, who stood taller as the spotlight of legacy fell on him. And then, slowly, deliberately, my father's eyes cut across the room until they found me. In the Ellis clan, he said, voice dropping an octave, intimate but sharp enough to slice. Discipline is our inheritance, our legacy. He paused, a master at timing, then softer. But sometimes that legacy skips a generation. It was a scalpel disguised as a sentence. The silence lasted a breath, then laughter erupted. Not cruel cackles, worse. Complicit, polite laughter that rippled outward like a command executed in unison. Generals, majors, contractors, they weren't laughing at a joke. They were laughing at a verdict. The sound pressed down on me. Every chuckle was another shovel of dirt on my mother's memory, another weight added to the name they'd tried to erase. I held my glass steady, though the ice rattled faintly against the rim. The only applause in my corner of the room. From the edge of my vision, I saw Landon peel away from the family circle. His stride was confident, easy, the kind of walk that belonged to someone who had never doubted his place in the room. He came close enough for the heat of champagne on his breath to mix with the starched air between us. Still as plump as ever, he whispered. His lips curled into the smirk I knew too well. Odora. The name hit like a signature, the old insult drawn from the archive of my youth, a name Evelyn had approved with her tight smile, a name my father had never stopped. It was more than a taunt. It was a stamp. You don't belong. My stomach tightened, but I didn't flinch. I turned my head just slightly and smiled. It wasn't warmth. It was the smile I had built in mirrors for years, a mask of control, polished and hollow. Enjoy the evening, Landon, I said evenly. My voice was low, almost pleasant, the kind of calm that unsettles more than any anger could. He blinked, just once, caught off guard by the absence of reaction. Then he straightened, smirk restored, and walked back to the circle of belonging. Back to the laughter that flowed so easily when aimed against me. From my seat near the service doors, I saw Evelyn watch the exchange with quiet satisfaction. She believed the hierarchy had been reinforced, that her son had finished the job. What none of them realized was that the word Landon had just whispered was not an insult anymore. It was a trigger, a code, a reminder of why I had prepared what I had hidden inside the very program running on the ballroom's giant screens. The timing was perfect. My father thought his speech had crowned his successor. Evelyn thought her erasure was complete. Landon thought his insult had cut me down. But ghosts do not die from names. Ghosts use names as signals. The ballroom had delivered its verdict. Mine was still to come. The tribute video began like every other carefully staged performance my father had orchestrated over the years. On the twin projector screens flanking the ballroom, sweeping shots of the F-22 Raptor filled the space, its fuselage gleaming under Nevada sun, its engines roaring as it cut through the sky. The orchestra swelled. The audience, mesmerized, leaned forward as if the jet itself were the embodiment of the Ellis name. Then came Landon, the Heir. My brother appeared in slow motion, climbing into the cockpit with practiced ease. He looked like the poster boy for the next era of aerial dominance. jaw set, eyes fixed on the horizon. His voiceover followed, scripted but convincing. This isn't just a program. It's the future of American air power. Applause rippled. Glasses clinked. Evelyn's hand squeezed my father's arm, pride radiating from her like heat. The camera cut to her in the audience, her smile flawless, maternal, triumphant. The screen told their story, the chosen family, the destined legacy. I glanced at the folded program in front of me. A grease pencil X marked the timestamp. My heartbeat slowed to match it. One breath in, one breath out. Then Landon's voice, live from the podium, cut across the room. "Of course," he said smoothly. "None of this would be possible without the groundwork of a nameless engineer. A ghost in the machine, as they say." He looked toward me, smirking, and gestured lazily. "She's even in this room tonight." A crumb. An acknowledgement disguised as dismissal. He thought he'd finished me with a wave of his hand. That was the moment. The screen behind him flickered. Just a heartbeat. A glitch no one expected at a meticulously planned gala. The corporate logo dissolved into blackness. The orchestra cut out mid-note. 100 murmurs rose. And then, against the black, a single green cursor blinked. Once. Twice. Lines of white text cascaded down the screens, raw and unpolished. Flight telemetry strings, timestamps, data packets. Not fireworks, not sabotage, just code. The kind of truth no applause could drown out. The cascade froze. The cursor blinked again. Then 2 lines burned themselves into the silence. Original flight metadata restored. Authorized test pilot, First Lieutenant Louise Ellis, Session LE Zoo 2. My name hung across both screens in stark white, a spotlight brighter than any chandelier. The ballroom froze. Forks halted midair. Breaths caught. The only sound was the faint buzz of the projector fans. General Abbott was the first to stand. 4 stars on his shoulder, his presence alone was enough to silence the murmurs. His voice carried like a blade drawn from its sheath. "Colonel Ellis," he said evenly, "perhaps you can explain this." My father rose halfway, face pale but composed, his mouth parting to summon a bluff. "There must be a malfunction in—" "No, sir." A young AV technician interjected from the side of the room, his own voice trembling but firm. "It's reading from the embedded metadata, local file, not the network feed." A low wave of whispers spread like ripples across the ballroom. Evelyn's mask cracked, the smile faltering, eyes darting. Landon's smirk collapsed entirely, his face flushing crimson under the stage lights. I stayed seated near the service doors, my hands folded neatly on the table. My breathing was steady. I said nothing. The truth didn't need my voice. On the screens, the cursor blinked once more and vanished, leaving only my name frozen in white letters against the black. Every eye followed the invisible line from the screen to me. For the first time, the laughter that had drowned me hours earlier was gone. In its place, silence. Heavy, electric, undeniable. Ghosts don't shout. Ghosts reveal. And that night, the ghost they had tried to erase was the only one left standing. The gala ended not with applause, but with silence, broken only by the scrape of chairs and the shuffle of polished shoes as people rose, uneasy from their tables. No one gave toasts anymore. The champagne sat untouched. What had begun as a coronation ended as an inquiry. The next morning, the machinery of the Air Force did what it always does. It moved with calm efficiency. Not with drama, not with shouting, but with procedure. A notice was delivered before sunrise. Immediate administrative review of Phantom X data integrity. Interim hold on contract announcement pending verification. It was typed in standard memorandum format, stamped and dated, not a whisper of scandal in its phrasing. But everyone understood what it meant. The crown had slipped. At 800, I sat across a long table in a windowless conference room. A recorder's red light blinked steadily. Across from me sat two officers in dress uniforms, a JAG captain at their side. Their questions were clipped, methodical. "Lieutenant, did you alter official records?" "No, ma'am. I restored metadata that had been amended. The file had my embedded signature." "Why was the signature embedded?" "It was part of the original testing protocol, a checksum to verify authenticity. I left it in deliberately. Standard practice." They nodded. Notes were written, nothing dramatic, nothing accusatory. They were not interested in my father's legacy or my brother's smirk. They wanted facts, receipts, timestamps. Later that day, I passed a printed extract in the hallway. Bold header, preliminary report of discrepancy. Below, a line that would travel across commands. Original session data authenticated. Subsequent edits inconsistent with metadata integrity. My father's name wasn't on it. Mine was. The consequences spread like cracks in glass. A contractor boardroom meeting that should have been a celebration turned tense. Investors asked sharp questions about integrity and oversight. For the first time, my father hesitated. His vocabulary of charm faltered when math entered the room. An older investor leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp. "Colonel, your narrative was compelling. But if your daughter authored the code, why was her name missing from every report?" My father's smile was a thin, brittle thing. "It was a clerical oversight, a technical simplification." I watched his hands tighten on the edge of the table, his knuckles pale. For decades, I had seen him command stages with ease. Now, in this small moment, I saw him falter. The inquiry expanded. Contractors were instructed to provide source code access logs. Security officers reviewed badge entries. The AV technician who had spoken up at the gala provided his system logs. They matched my account exactly. Every piece of evidence pointed in one direction. The truth had not been sabotaged. It had been suppressed. The Heir, Landon, confronted me once. Not in public, not with bravado. It was in the quiet of a base corridor, his dress shoes clicking on the tiles. He stopped, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor. "You set me up," he muttered. "No," I said evenly. "The record set itself up." He looked up then, the smirk gone. What replaced it unsettled me more than his arrogance ever had. Confusion, doubt. The first cracks in the certainty he had been raised on. Institutional consequences moved with measured weight. My father was formally relieved of consultant duties pending review. Evelyn vanished from the base circuit, her smile no longer in demand. Landon was reassigned, still flying, but no longer the centerpiece of a project he had been groomed to inherit. And me? I wasn't celebrated. No applause followed. I wasn't lifted onto anyone's shoulders. The Air Force doesn't work that way. Instead, I received a quiet directive. Assist in developing new data integrity protocols for the program. Report to Acquisitions Command for further duties. It was not glory. It was work. But it was mine. The laughter from the gala had faded. In its place, there were memos, logs, signatures, and consequences. That is how institutions change. Not in speeches, but in paper trails. And for the first time, the paper carried my name. The inquiry stretched into months, but the outcome was steady and predictable. My father's consulting contract was quietly dissolved. No announcement, no scandal on the evening news. Just a memorandum filed, signatures inked, clearances downgraded. Evelyn retreated to the periphery, her smile absent from official photographs. Landon kept flying, but his assignments shifted to routine sorties and training exercises. He was no longer the face of the future. For me, there was no medal, no standing ovation. My consequence was different. Responsibility. The Acquisitions Command tasked me with building a small training module on telemetry discipline and data integrity. It wasn't glamorous, no air shows, no promotional videos. Just a windowless room with humming projectors, whiteboards scrawled with equations, and a handful of junior officers who listened because procedure demanded it. But to me, it was oxygen. I drafted the syllabus myself. Module 3 bore the simplest heading, Truth Under Pressure. Inside the slides were more than formulas. I included the subtle lessons I had carved into myself. Double-check your logs, protect your data, document everything, breathe before reacting. Receipts, not outbursts. Clarity, not noise. One morning, as I pinned a new checklist to the wall, I heard the familiar echo of boots in the hallway. I didn't need to look up to know it was him. Landon leaned against the doorframe, shoulders squared but less certain than before. His uniform was still crisp, his hair still regulation perfect, but something in his posture had changed. The easy arrogance was gone. He stepped inside. "They told me you're running a module on anti-G straining maneuvers." I nodded. "Part of it, yes. It's not glamorous, but it keeps you conscious when the world wants to black you out." He smirked faintly, but it wasn't the cruel smile I remembered. "Show me." I studied him for a moment. This was the same brother who had whispered Odora at my ear, who had laughed when Evelyn weaponized a dress size against me. Yet standing there, he looked less like an heir and more like a pilot who didn't want to crash. I gestured to the chair opposite me. "Sit. Start with your breathing." He obeyed. Belly in. Fill it. Now exhale. Flex from your calves upward. Tighten your core as if you're bracing for a punch. Make this sound. I demonstrated, sharp and clipped. Hick. He tried, awkward at first, his cheeks flushing as the noise came out wrong. I kept my voice level. Again, slower. This time he managed it, his torso tightening in rhythm. His eyes widened slightly. Feels different. That's the point. You can't control G-forces. You manage them. Discipline isn't about controlling other people. It's about doing what keeps you alive under pressure. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he gave a small nod. Not the theatrical tilt of a prince acknowledging a subject, but something smaller, quieter. A nod of respect. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a beginning. After he left, I looked back at the whiteboard where 3 words stood in thick black marker. Breathe. Checklists. Clarity. That was all I wanted to leave behind. Not legacy, not headlines, not monuments carved in marble. Just tools that would outlast me in the cockpit, in the simulator, in the minds of those who came next. The sky no longer felt like a cage to escape or a prize to win back. It felt like neutral ground, big enough for both my brother and me to fly in without one of us erasing the other. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight in my chest loosen. Not victory, not revenge. Just air. The months that followed were quieter than I had ever imagined. There were no parades, no headlines, no triumphant music. Just a slow shift in how people looked at me and how I looked at myself. In the hangars and offices, the whispers softened. Pilots who once dismissed me as princess or tourist now nodded in greeting. They didn't call me ghost to my face, but I heard the word passed quietly in the corridors, always with a weight of respect. Respect. Not worship, not fame, not adoration. Just respect. That was enough. My father's fall was not loud. It was procedural. The contracts he loved were signed without him. The rooms he once commanded now filled by other voices. He remained a colonel on paper, but the center of gravity had shifted. He was no longer the star around which others orbited. In time, I realized that was its own justice. Evelyn faded faster than he did. Without the spotlight, her sharp edges dulled, her war of erasure abandoned. Landon, he surprised me most of all. Slowly, cautiously, he began to shed the arrogance he had been wrapped in since childhood. For the first time, I saw him not as heir or rival, but as a brother learning what discipline really meant. And me? I stopped chasing legacy. For years, I thought the only way to survive was to outdo them, to build something greater, louder, more undeniable. But revenge is not the same as peace. I learned that the hard way. What stayed with me were the quiet lessons. That authority comes not from arrogance, but from competence. That dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered. That sometimes the most devastating blow is not delivered in anger, but in silence, by simply presenting the truth. I think often about that word, legacy. My father used it like a weapon, a banner to justify his cruelty. But legacy is not marble statues or gala speeches. It is what people remember when the noise fades. It is the receipts you leave behind. Honesty, discipline, clarity. That night, when Landon stood on stage and saluted me, I understood something I never had before. I didn't need to bury my family. I just needed to stand long enough for their illusions to collapse on their own. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Dignity doesn't expire. And sometimes the strongest signal a ghost can leave is not haunting, but truth. Have you ever seen someone underestimated until the truth came out? If this story resonated with you, hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell icon so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who believes quiet doesn't mean weak. And check out our other Echoes of Revenge stories, linked on screen now. We post a new story every single day,